The security chief snatched the phone from the quiet man's hand and smashed it against the marble floor. He expected the man to flinch, to argue, maybe to cry. Instead, Cole Barrett watched the pieces scatter across the polished stone and said nothing. Then every light in the building turned red. Every elevator stopped dead. Every financial transaction inside one of Chicago's most powerful corporations froze simultaneously, and a verification request appeared on every security terminal in the building, asking why a device registered personally to the founder of Vanguard Meridian Group had just been destroyed. Nobody in that lobby had looked twice at the man in the weathered coat. They were looking now. If you've never seen a story where the quietest person in the room turns out to be the most dangerous, stay with me, because this one will stay with you. Subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss what comes next. Hit the like button. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this is just the beginning. The rain came in sideways that Thursday morning, the kind that soaked through a coat before a person even reached the door. Cole Barrett stood at the corner of Michigan Avenue and pulled the collar of his jacket up, not because it helped much, but because it was something to do with his hands. He had been standing there for 6 minutes, not because he was lost, not because he was nervous, but because once he walked through those doors, there was no version of this morning that ended quietly. He looked at the building. Vanguard Meridian Group occupied 42 floors of glass and polished steel, the kind of structure that was designed to make ordinary people feel small before they even reached the revolving door. The lobby alone, he knew from memory, ran 300 feet of imported white marble, climate-controlled, permanently staffed by 16 security personnel on a standard weekday morning. Cole had designed the security architecture for that lobby himself 7 years ago. He knew where every camera was positioned. He knew the blind spots. He knew which elevator shafts doubled as emergency exits and which maintenance corridors ran parallel to the main stairwells. He knew the weight distribution tolerances of the service doors on floors 12 through 19, because he had written that specification into the original installation brief. He also knew, because he had spent the better part of 3 weeks reviewing everything Sloane Carrington had sent him, that at least 4 of those cameras were no longer showing real time. He crossed the street. The revolving door pushed warm air against his face as he stepped inside, and immediately he felt the shift, that specific quality of silence that expensive buildings manufactured deliberately. The background hum of ventilation systems tuned to muffle street noise, the particular acoustic deadness of marble and high ceilings that swallowed footsteps and made everyone unconsciously lower their voices. Cole did not lower his voice. He also did not rush. He walked to the reception desk at his own pace, set the sealed envelope on the counter, and said, "Cole Barrett, I need to speak with Sloane Carrington before her board meeting." The receptionist, young, professional, visibly uncertain, looked at the envelope, then at him. His coat was not new. His shoes were clean but not polished. He had not shaved that morning because his daughter Emma had woken up at 5:30 with a nightmare about her first day at her new school, and by the time Cole had talked her back to sleep and made her breakfast and gotten her to the bus stop, there had not been time. He did not look like someone who belonged in this lobby. He was used to that. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, but tell her the name. She'll understand what it means." The receptionist picked up her phone. Cole stepped back from the desk, turned slightly, and let his eyes move across the lobby in the unhurried way that had become reflex after so many years not searching exactly, just registering. Position, posture, movement, attention. The 2 guards near the main elevator bank. The 3rd positioned by the east corridor door, standing a half step too close to the wall, which meant he had been told to hold that position specifically rather than patrol it naturally. The cameras above the reception desk. 14 seconds. He clocked it almost without thinking. The footage was running 14 seconds behind real time. Someone had adjusted the feed delay. That was not a technical glitch. That was a deliberate configuration change, and it required administrative access to the security system's core management interface, the same interface that Cole had built with a 5-layer authentication requirement, precisely because he had understood, even then, that whoever controlled the cameras controlled the building's version of reality. He filed that away. Behind him, a door opened and Trent Maddox walked in. Cole recognized him from the personnel files Harlan had forwarded. Security Director. Former municipal law enforcement, 12 years. Transferred to private sector 8 years ago. Competent record. 2 formal commendations. 1 disciplinary note from 3 years back that had been quietly removed from the accessible database, though not quietly enough, because Harlan's people had found the original. The disciplinary note was about following orders without question in a situation where questioning them would have been the correct professional response. Cole noticed the way Maddox moved, not aggressive. Not uncertain either. The walk of someone who had already been briefed and had already decided how the next 5 minutes would go. That was going to be a problem. Mr. Barrett Maddox stopped 6 feet away. His 2 guards fanned out slightly without being told to, which meant they had rehearsed this positioning. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Cole looked at him steadily. "I'd like you to verify my identity first. We've been made aware of who you are." That's not the same thing as verifying it. Maddox's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted the faint flicker of a man recalibrating. He had expected argument, probably. Elevation of voice. Some version of the person he had been told to expect. "Sir, I've been informed that you're a former employee with a grievance against this company and that you may represent a threat to the safety of our executives. I'm asking you to leave voluntarily. Who informed you?" Pause. "That's not information I'm required to share." "Was it Warren Pike?" Maddox's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Cole watched it happen. "I'm asking you to leave, Mr. Barrett. I won't ask again." Cole stood still for a moment. He was thinking about Emma, actually a stray thought, the kind that arrived at strange times. She had asked him that morning, while eating her toast, why he had to go to the city today. He had told her it was work. She had accepted that with the practical matter-of-factness of a 9-year-old who had learned not to ask too many questions about the things her father did before he picked her up. He had promised her he would be back before dinner. He intended to keep that promise. "All right," he said. "Before I go verify the device registration on this number." He held out a card, a single phone number, handwritten. Maddox did not take it. "Mr. Barrett." The phone in Cole's jacket pocket buzzed. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at Maddox. "I need you to understand something before I answer this," Cole said. "Caller on this line has executive override authority over every access protocol in this building, including the ones that govern your position. I am asking you, not threatening you, asking you do not interfere with this call." Maddox's eyes went to the phone. "Who is it?" Cole answered instead of responding to the question. He put the call on speaker because he wanted there to be no confusion later about what had been said and who had heard it. The voice that came through was older, slightly ragged at the edges, the way voices got when medication and weeks of restricted activity had worn something down. Clarity underneath it was unmistakable, the particular precision of someone who had built an empire word by careful word and had never once said anything accidentally. "This is Sloane Carrington. I am the founder and majority stakeholder of Vanguard Meridian Group. Mr. Barrett is acting with my full authority and with my direct personal instruction. He is to be given immediate access to my daughter and to the board meeting scheduled for." Trent Maddox reached over and took the phone out of Cole's hand. Cole said, "Don't." Maddox looked at him for exactly 1 second, and then he dropped the phone against the marble floor. It hit with a crack that echoed off every hard surface in the lobby. Screen went dark. A piece of the casing skipped across the floor and stopped near the base of the reception desk. Silence. Then the emergency lighting system activated. The overhead LEDs shifted from white to the deep amber red of a level 1 security alert, and every person in the lobby stopped moving simultaneously the way people do when something happens that none of them have a framework to process. The 2 guards near the elevators looked at each other. The receptionist stood up from her chair without quite meaning to. The man near the east corridor door took a step forward and then stopped. The elevators locked. Cole could hear it, a low mechanical thunk that traveled through the building's bones as every cab engaged its emergency brake simultaneously. Then every terminal at the security desk began displaying the same notification. Cole could not read it from where he stood, but he did not need to. He knew what it said because he had written the protocol himself: device authentication failure, registered asset of H. Carrington emergency lockdown, engaged board voting authority, suspended pending verification. Maddox stared at his terminal screen. His face had changed. Cole crouched, picked up the broken pieces of the phone, and set them carefully on the reception desk. Then he straightened and looked at Trent Maddox with the patient expression of a man who had known what was going to happen before he walked through the door. That phone, Cole said, was the personal emergency device of Harlan Carrington. It was registered under his founding member credentials, which carry automatic lockdown authority as a security feature I built into Sentinel Crown 7 years ago. Destroying it triggered an emergency protocol that has now suspended every voting authority tied to the board meeting currently scheduled upstairs. He paused. You have 6 hours before that suspension expires. I suggest we stop wasting them. Nobody in the lobby spoke. Everyone was looking at the unremarkable man in the weathered coat. Maddox's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the screen again, then at the pieces of the phone on the reception desk, and Cole could see the exact moment the man understood that the briefing he had received that morning had not told him the whole truth or perhaps any of it. One of the younger guards said quietly, "Sir, the network monitor is showing a full financial freeze. Transactions, clearances, the whole system." Maddox did not answer him. Cole pulled a chair from near the reception area and sat down, because his knee had been bothering him since the drive in, and there was no point standing on it unnecessarily. He had broken it badly during a training exercise in the 9th year of his service, and it had never gone back to exactly what it was before. And on cold, rainy mornings, it reminded him of that fact with a consistency he had come to find almost companionable. He looked up at Maddox. "I wasn't here to threaten anyone," Cole said. "I was here because someone inside this company has spent the past 4 months trying to take it apart from the inside, and Harlan Carrington asked me to stop them. That's all. That's the whole thing." He looked around the lobby at the red emergency lights, at the frozen terminals, at the guards who were waiting for someone to tell them what to do. "I'd have preferred to do this quietly, but here we are." Somewhere above them, on the 41st floor, the board meeting that Warren Pike had spent months engineering was sitting in suspended animation. And Cole Barrett, the single father nobody had looked at twice, when he walked through the door, settled into the chair and waited for Sloane Carrington to come down. He hoped she came ready to listen. In his experience, the people who needed the most help were almost always the last ones willing to accept it. Outside, the rain had not let up. Chicago in November did not apologize for itself. Neither did Cole Barrett, though he was. Even now, thinking about what to make Emma for dinner, and whether she had remembered to bring her rain jacket to school that morning, and how he was going to explain the events of this day to a 9-year-old who trusted him completely and deserved a father who came home when he said he would. He had promised her dinner. He kept his promises. Sloane Carrington came off the elevator at a pace that suggested she had not walked anywhere slowly in years. She was 30 years old and carried herself the way people did when they had spent every day of their adult life proving something to someone chin up, shoulders set, the kind of posture that was half confidence and half armor. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Cole's monthly mortgage payment, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that left her face completely exposed, no softness to hide behind. Behind her came 2 of her personal staff, both of them struggling to match her stride, and beside her appearing from what seemed like nowhere, which told Cole the man had been waiting near the stairwell rather than the elevator, was Warren Pike. Cole had studied Warren Pike's photograph for 3 evenings running, sitting at the kitchen table after Emma went to bed, going through everything Harlan had sent him. 54 years old, senior executive vice president, 22 years with Vanguard, longer than Sloane had been an adult. The photograph had shown a man with a careful smile, the kind of smile that was always ready, always positioned correctly, like a piece of furniture arranged for a specific effect. In person, Warren Pike looked exactly like his photograph, which Cole found immediately suspicious. People who looked exactly like their photographs had usually spent considerable time practicing. Sloane stopped 6 feet from Cole's chair. She looked at him, then at the red emergency lights, then at Maddox. "Someone explain to me what is happening in my building right now." Maddox opened his mouth. Warren got there first. "Miss Carrington, This man triggered your security system by attacking one of your security personnel and deliberately sabotaging a Vanguard network terminal. He needs to be removed immediately, and law enforcement needs to be contacted. He said it smoothly, with the practiced urgency of someone who had rehearsed exactly this version of events. Every minute we spend down here is your board is sitting in a room waiting for you. Cole stood up from the chair, slowly because his knee was stiff and there was no point pretending otherwise. I triggered the lockdown by accident, Cole said. Your security director smashed a phone that was registered to your father. The system did what it was designed to do. He looked at Sloane directly, not at Warren. My name is Cole Barrett. 7 years ago, I helped your father build the cybersecurity platform that runs this entire building. 3 weeks ago, your father contacted me privately and asked me to come here this morning. I have an envelope for you. He held it out. Sloane did not take it immediately. She studied him the way people studied things they had been warned about, with the particular attention of someone trying to determine whether the warning was accurate or whether the warning itself was the problem. Warren told me about you, she said. He said, you were terminated 7 years ago for misconduct. That you've been attempting to contact me through unauthorized channels. That's not accurate. He has documentation. I'd be interested to see it. Warren stepped forward slightly. Miss Carrington, we don't have time for. What's in the envelope? Sloane asked. She was still looking at Cole. Evidence that someone has been altering your father's medical records, redirecting company funds through accounts that don't appear in any standard audit, and has spent the last 4 months building the legal groundwork to remove you as CEO and transfer controlling interest of Sentinel Crown to a third party. Cole kept his voice level. Not dramatic, not urgent, just factual. The way you said things when you needed someone to actually hear them, rather than react to the delivery. Your father found out. He reached out to me because I'm one of the few people connected to this company who doesn't have anything to gain by staying quiet about it. The lobby had gone very still. The 2 staff members behind Sloane were not pretending to look at their tablets anymore. The guards near the elevator bank had stopped shifting their weight. Even the receptionist, who had presumably witnessed a fair number of unusual mornings, was watching with the focused attention of someone who understood they were in the middle of something that would be discussed for a long time afterward. Warren's voice came out sharper than he probably intended. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I warned you about, Sloane. This man is attempting to destabilize your confidence before a critical board meeting by making unsubstantiated accusations against senior leadership. It is a tactic. Don't let him, Warren. Sloane said his name quietly. Just his name. Warren stopped talking. She reached out and took the envelope from Cole's hand. She did not open it yet. She held it and looked at Cole with an expression he recognized, not trust exactly, not suspicion exactly, but the careful arithmetic of someone trying to calculate what they didn't yet know. If everything you're saying is true, she said, why didn't my father contact me directly? Because someone has been monitoring your communications for at least 6 weeks. He didn't want to flag you as a target before he had enough evidence to act on. Cole paused. He also wasn't sure who you'd tell. That landed. He could see it land not with offense, but with the specific discomfort of someone hearing something true that they would have preferred not to hear. Behind Sloane, Warren Pike was watching Cole with an expression that had changed. Practiced urgency was still there, the surface of it, but underneath, and Cole had spent years learning to read the space between what people showed and what they were actually doing underneath. There was calculation. Cold, fast, and very specific. The man was not panicking. He was adjusting. That was more dangerous than panic. Cole's knee ached. The emergency lights made everyone look slightly unwell, that amber-red wash flattening faces and throwing shadows in directions that felt wrong. He thought, briefly and without meaning to, about the particular quality of red light on a different kind of night, in a different place, years before Emma in Chicago, and weathered coats, and pushed the thought back where it belonged. Ms. Carrington, he said, I need about 20 minutes in a room with a secure terminal. What I have to show you cannot wait until after your board meeting. The board meeting is the problem. Sloane looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, Trent, put us in Conference C, and get me a technical analyst up here who isn't connected to the security floor. Maddox nodded, looking relieved to have something concrete to do. Warren said, "Sloane, I strongly advise. You can come with us, Warren," she said, and her voice had shifted into something that was not quite an invitation. "Actually, I'd prefer it." She walked toward the corridor. Cole followed. Warren fell into step beside him, and Cole could feel the man's attention the way you felt weather changing, that specific pressure of someone deciding what their next move was going to be. They were halfway to Conference C when Cole stopped walking. He stopped because he had been counting, unconsciously, the way old habit made him count things, and the number he had arrived at was wrong. He turned and looked back at the camera array above the main elevator bank. 14 seconds. He had clocked it when he walked in and filed it away because it had seemed worth noting but not immediately urgent. Now, standing in the corridor with Warren Pike 6 feet to his left, it moved from the back of his mind to the front with the kind of urgency that his body recognized before his thoughts fully assembled the reason. Mr. Maddox Cole had not raised his voice. Trent Maddox stopped and looked back. "Who has administrative access to your surveillance management system?" Maddox frowned. "Why? Your cameras are running a 14-second delay. That's not a glitch. Someone changed the buffer configuration deliberately, and that requires back-end access. I'm asking who has it." Maddox's frown deepened. He turned to the nearest guard, said something Cole couldn't fully hear. The guard pulled out a tablet, tapped through several screens, and his expression shifted into the particular blankness of someone who had found something they did not know how to explain. "Sir," the guard said carefully, "the configuration change was logged at 6:47 this morning." Under Commander Holloway's credentials, Maddox went still. Cole watched him process that information, watched the sequence of it move across the man's face, not dramatically, just the gradual realignment of someone whose internal map of the morning had just turned out to be wrong. Bryce Holloway was the security commander 1 level above Maddox. The man who had sent Maddox his briefing about Cole Barrett at 6:15 this morning. Cole said nothing. He waited. Maddox looked up from the tablet and met Cole's eyes. "You knew," Maddox said. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was the voice of someone who had just understood they'd been used as a tool. "I suspected," Cole said. "I didn't know what it would end up connecting to." He kept his tone even, not unkind. "You acted on information someone gave you. I get it. That's not the same as being part of it." Maddox's jaw was tight. He nodded once, the short, sharp nod of someone accepting a fact they would rather not have to accept. Kept moving. Conference Room C was a glass-walled space on the second mezzanine level, visible from the lobby below, but insulated enough for a private conversation. Cole had been inside it once before, years ago, going over installation specifications with Harlan personally. The room had not changed. Same long table, same chairs, same view of the Chicago skyline going gray and wet behind floor-to-ceiling windows. He set his bag on the table and pulled out a second device, this one his own, a ruggedized field tablet that he had loaded with encrypted copies of everything Harlan had sent him before driving in from the suburbs that morning. He also pulled out a small external authentication module, no larger than a thumb drive, that he plugged into the table's built-in port. Sloane sat across from him. She had not opened the envelope yet. She set it on the table in front of her and folded her hands over it and waited. Warren sat 2 seats down from Sloane. He had his phone out and was typing something. Cole did not stare, but he registered it. "Start talking," Sloane said. Cole started talking. He told it without embellishment, because embellishment was what people did when they needed to compensate for weak material, and the material he had was not weak. Started with Harlan's first contact, a message, through a channel that Cole had not used in 4 years. Routed through 3 relay points, the way Harlan had learned to route things during the years they had worked closely together, building Sentinel Crown's original architecture. The message had been brief. It had said, "Someone is taking everything I built. I need your eyes. Come when you can. Tell no one." He had driven to the private medical facility in rural Wisconsin 2 weekends ago, leaving Emma with his neighbor Janet, telling Emma he had a work meeting. Emma had accepted this with the mild skepticism of a 9-year-old who had grown up around a father who occasionally had work meetings that he didn't explain in detail. She had made him promise to bring back the good cheese from the gas station 2 miles from Janet's house, because there was apparently a gas station near Janet's house that sold artisanal cheddar, and Emma had opinions about it. He had brought the cheese. He had also come back from Wisconsin with a head full of information that had kept him awake for 11 of the 14 nights since. "Your father built this company over 30 years, Cole said. Sentinel Crown was his most significant work, not financially, though obviously it's worth considerable money, but in terms of what it actually does. The encryption architecture it uses protects banking networks, hospital systems, transportation infrastructure. It's not a product. It's a framework that other critical systems depend on." He paused. "Someone wants to take it private through a shell acquisition. Once it's out from under Vanguard's governance structure, the licensing model changes. Access becomes restricted. Certain data vulnerabilities that currently get patched automatically would be left open." Sloane looked at him steadily. "That's a very large claim." "Yes. Do you have documentation to support it?" "Some of it." He turned the tablet toward her. "Your father has more. What's on this device is a partial record enough to demonstrate the pattern. The full record is at the facility in Wisconsin." He looked at her. "You didn't know about the facility." It was not quite a question. Sloane's expression did not change, but her hands tightened slightly over the envelope. "He told me he was receiving outpatient care at Northwestern. He said it wasn't serious. The Northwestern appointments were real. They were also partly for misdirection. Someone had already been accessing his primary physician's records, your father found out, and moved the important material to a location that wasn't connected to his public medical profile." Warren looked up from his phone. "This is an extraordinary story, Mr. Barrett, and I mean that literally. It would be extraordinary if any of it were true." His tone had returned to the measured reasonableness that Cole suspected was his default professional register. "Harlan Carrington is a 68-year-old man with documented cognitive decline. I say that with deep respect for everything he built, but the board has reviewed medical assessments that—" "Which assessments?" Cole asked. Warren blinked. "I'm sorry? Which medical assessments, specifically, has the board reviewed? Who prepared them? Which physician's name appears on the primary documentation?" Pause. "Dr. Ansel Rowe. He's been Harlan's attending. Dr. Rowe's practice received 3 payments from a subsidiary account connected to Vanguard's Treasury Management Division in the 14 months prior to Harlan's initial evaluation for cognitive decline. Payments are categorized as consulting fees. There is no record of any consulting services rendered." Cole let that sit for a moment. "I'm not saying you knew that, Warren. I'm saying it's documented." Warren's face did something complicated that he controlled quickly. Sloane had opened the envelope. She was reading, slowly, the way people read things when they were forcing themselves not to react until they had finished. Cole watched her eyes move across the first page, then the second. Then she set the pages face down on the table, and for a moment she looked out at the gray Chicago skyline, and Cole could not entirely read what was happening behind her eyes. It was too many things at once for a single expression to contain. Then she looked at Warren. Warren said, "Sloane, don't." She said it the same way she had said his name in the lobby. Quiet, final, the sound of a door being closed. She looked back at Cole. "What do you need from me?" Before Cole could answer, the door to Conference C opened. He knew who it was before he turned around, because the configuration changed to the surveillance system had told him someone would be watching this room, and if someone had been watching this room, they would have known the moment the conversation shifted from containable to dangerous. He had expected it would take approximately 20 minutes from the time they sat down. It had taken 18. Bryce Holloway was a large man, 6'2", built like someone who had stayed in physical training long after his operational years were behind him. He wore the Vanguard security commander's uniform with the self-possession of someone who had worn authority long enough that it had stopped feeling like a costume. Behind him came 4 guards, not the regular lobby security, different builds, different postures, the kind of deliberate physical positioning that Cole recognized from experience as professional rather than organizational. These men were not Vanguard employees, or if they were not primarily Vanguard employees. "Ms. Carrington," Holloway said, his voice carrying the particular register of someone who was framing control as concern, "I need to ask you to come with me. Mr. Barrett has breached multiple security protocols, and we have reason to believe he may have accessed." "I authorized him to be in this room," Sloane said. "With Respect Miss Carrington, your authorization was given without full information about. Trent, Cole said. Maddox, who had been standing near the door, looked at him. Ask them for verification, Cole said. Standard verification. Their Vanguard security credentials, biometric confirmation, and their duty log for this morning. Holloway's eyes moved to Cole, and something in them went flat. Commander Maddox reports to me. He doesn't take direction from. Trent. Cole kept his voice the same, not harder, not louder. Just the same. Maddox hesitated. Cole could see the calculation happening. This was a man being asked to do something that carried real professional risk, being asked by someone he had no particular reason to trust, in a room where the established hierarchy was telling him to do the opposite thing. But Maddox was also a man who had just learned that his briefing that morning had come from someone who had deliberately altered the building's surveillance buffer. And that fact was sitting in him somewhere, uncomfortable and insistent. He said, Commander Holloway, I need to see verification for you and your team. Standard duty protocol. Holloway's jaw set. Maddox, I'm ordering you to stand down. I'm asking for standard verification, sir. Stand down. Now, the silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Holloway said to the 2 guards nearest him, remove Maddox. 2 guards moved toward Trent, and Cole was already moving. It had been 7 years since he had done anything like this with any regularity, and his knee was bad. And he was 37 years old and had eaten a bowl of cereal for breakfast because Emma had used the last of the eggs. And none of those things changed what happened next, because the particular kind of training Cole had received was not the kind that faded. It went somewhere deep, below memory, below thought. The first guard had covered half the distance to Maddox when Cole stepped across his path. He used the man's own forward momentum, redirected it, and put him down with controlled force, not brutally, nothing that would cause lasting damage, but with the specific efficiency of someone who had learned the difference between stopping a threat and creating additional problems. The second guard adjusted and came at Cole from the side, and Cole moved with the same economy, the same low center of gravity that his bad knee had actually reinforced over the years, and put that one down too. 4 seconds, maybe 5, he stepped back. His breath was even. His knee hurt. The room was very still. Holloway had not moved. He was looking at Cole with an expression that had dropped every layer of professional performance and was now simply, directly hostile. Get him, Holloway said to the remaining 2 guards. Don't. Sloane was on her feet. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the room completely. Nobody moves. She looked at Holloway. Get out of my building, Bryce. And tell Warren that whatever he told you this meeting was going to accomplish, he was wrong. Warren, still seated, had gone very pale. Holloway looked at Warren. Warren gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Holloway and the 2 remaining guards backed out of the room. In the silence that followed, Trent Maddox let out a breath. He looked at the 2 men on the floor, neither of whom appeared to be seriously injured. And then he looked at Cole with an expression that was somewhere between stunned and something more complicated than stunned. You were a Navy SEAL, Maddox said. A long time ago, Cole said. That's not something you stop being. Cole didn't answer that. He reached down, pulled the closer guard's radio off his belt, and handed it to Maddox. Start monitoring their frequency. If Holloway contacts anyone outside this building, I need to know immediately. He looked at Sloane. We need to move. Conference C has a glass wall, and we just told everyone in this room exactly where we stand. Sloane nodded. She was gathering the documents from the table, her movements quick and precise. The shock was still there. Cole could see it. The way it made her hands not quite steady, but she was pushing through it, and that told him something useful about Sloane Carrington. People who pushed through shock that fast had usually learned somewhere along the way that stopping wasn't an option. There's a general counsel on site, Marissa Keene. Mm-hmm. Your father mentioned her specifically. He said she was someone who could be trusted. Sloane glanced at him. She's on the 37th floor. We need her with us. Maddox said elevators are still locked. I know. Cole picked up his bag. There's a maintenance corridor that runs parallel to stairwell B. It goes from the mezzanine level all the way to 39. I mapped it in the original installation plans. He looked at them, Sloane, Maddox, the 2 staff members who had come down with Sloane and were now standing near the far wall, looking like people who had made a series of unexpected professional decisions that morning. Stay close, and don't use your radios. He moved to the conference room service panel on the east wall, opened it the way he had opened dozens of identical panels over the years. The release catch was on the lower left corner, always was on Vanguard's installation configuration, and pulled it aside to reveal the access passage behind it. Sloane looked at the dark passage, then at Cole. "You really did build this building," she said. "Every access point," he said. "Every blind spot, every override." He looked back at her. "And right now, someone is trying to use that system against you. Which means the only real advantage we have is that I understand it better than they do." He stepped into the maintenance corridor. Behind him, he heard Sloane take a breath. Then her footsteps followed his. Then Maddox. Then the sound of the panel being pulled back into place. The corridor was narrow, and not particularly clean, and smelled of cable insulation and concrete. The particular anonymous smell of the working guts of a building that the polished public surfaces were designed to make you forget existed. Cole moved through it from Memory Third Junction, left, then straight until the pipe array forced a slight right, then down the utility stairs to the service level running parallel to floor 37. Somewhere behind them, above them, he thought, on the floors they were trying to reach, he could hear the building. Not in crisis exactly, but in the particular tension of a place where something had gone wrong, and nobody yet knew how wrong, where information was moving in ways that were not yet confirmed, and people were making decisions based on incomplete pictures. He understood that kind of situation intimately. The question was always the same: who was going to act on the truth faster than the other side could manufacture an alternative? Then the building's speaker system crackled to life. It was a facility-wide broadcast, the kind used for genuine emergencies, lockdown announcements, evacuation orders. Cole had designed the access requirements for that system himself, which meant that whoever was now speaking through it had credentials at the highest level of Vanguard's administrative structure. The voice was calm, professional, impossible to immediately identify. "Attention all Vanguard Meridian personnel. This is a security advisory. CEO Sloane Carrington has been forcibly detained by former employee Cole Barrett, who has breached multiple security systems and represents an active threat to the safety of personnel and company assets. All security teams are to locate and detain Mr. Barrett immediately. Ms. Carrington's safety is the priority," the message repeated. Maddox stopped walking. Cole could hear him stop. "They just told the entire building you kidnapped her," Maddox said. "Yes," Cole said. He kept moving. Sloane's voice came from directly behind him, quieter than it had been in any room that morning, carrying the particular controlled flatness of someone managing something that was close to the edge of what they could manage. "There are 260 people in this building right now. I know. They're all going to be looking for you. I know that too." Cole reached the access point for the 37th floor service level and stopped. He turned and looked back at her in the low-lit corridor. The red emergency lighting filtered down here as ambient glow, and in it Sloane Carrington looked younger than 30 and simultaneously older. The way people looked when something happened that peeled the professional surface back to whatever was actually underneath. "They're not going to find us," he said, "because they're going to be using the surveillance system, which is running 14 seconds behind real time. And I know every position in this building where that 14-second gap gives us cover." He paused. "But I need you to trust me. Right now, in this corridor, I need you to make a decision about that." Sloane held his gaze for a moment. "My father trusted you," she said finally. "Yes. He's never trusted anyone easily." "No," Cole said. "He hasn't." She looked at him for another 2 seconds, and Cole could see the calculation in it, not suspicious exactly. Just the honest arithmetic of a woman who had learned, probably the hard way, that trust extended carelessly had costs. That was not a character flaw. That was experience. "Okay," she said. "Move." He moved. Somewhere above them, an entire security force was reorganizing around a false narrative, hunting through 42 floors of polished corporate architecture for a man who had come to the building that morning with a sealed envelope and a bad knee and a promise to be home before dinner. Cole thought briefly about Emma again, the way she had looked at him across the breakfast table that morning. Serious in the way 9-year-olds were sometimes serious, asking if he would be careful today. He had told her yes. He intended to make good on that too. The server room was on the 14th floor, behind a door that did not appear on the building's publicly accessible floor plans. Cole had put it there himself. Not hidden exactly, it was documented in the installation brief, filed with the original construction permits, accessible to anyone who knew to look for it in the right filing category. But the filing category was obscure enough that it had not appeared in any of the security audit reports Warren's team had apparently reviewed when they were mapping Vanguard's infrastructure vulnerabilities, which told Cole that whoever had done that mapping was good but not thorough, and that distinction mattered. The room itself was the size of a large closet, server racks on 3 walls, a single workstation terminal, ventilation that ran louder than conversation required, and temperature control that made the space considerably colder than the corridor outside. Cole had chosen it not for comfort, but for the specific reason that its network node was on a physically isolated segment of Vanguard's infrastructure, a segment he had designed to be air-gapped from the main administrative network under anything short of a Level 3 emergency authorization. The lockdown Maddox had accidentally triggered qualified as a Level 3, which meant the air gap had temporarily lifted, and the isolated node was briefly, partially accessible from the right terminal with the right credentials. Cole had the credentials. He sat at the workstation and worked quickly, not rushing but moving with the focused economy of someone who understood that speed and accuracy were not the same thing, and that choosing one over the other at the wrong moment had consequences he could not afford. The others stood behind him. Sloane with her arms crossed, not from hostility, but from the particular posture of a person holding themselves together through sheer physical discipline. Maddox near the door, listening to the radio he'd taken from Holloway's guard. Marissa Keene, who they had collected from the 37th floor 7 minutes earlier, through a sequence of events that had required Sloane to talk her general counsel into a maintenance corridor through a cracked service door while a Vanguard. Security team swept the main hallway 12 feet away. Marissa was 51, with short gray hair and the expression of someone who had spent 3 decades as a corporate attorney and had therefore developed a very high tolerance for situations that other people found alarming. She had looked at Cole once when they were introduced in the corridor, sized him up in about 4 seconds, and said, "Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it." Cole had found her immediately useful. The 2 staff members who had followed Sloane from the elevator that morning, an assistant named Priya and a communications coordinator named Derek, had been redirected to a locked conference room on the 22nd floor with Sloane's explicit instruction to stay there, stay quiet, and not contact anyone using internal systems. Priya had looked frightened. Derek had looked like he was going to argue, and then thought better of it. Cole pulled up the encrypted chip's recovery interface. The chip itself was in 4 pieces. He had retrieved them from the marble floor of the lobby before anyone thought to prevent it the benefit of a situation in which everyone was busy looking at the emergency lights rather than the man crouching near the reception desk. Chip was physically damaged, the outer casing fractured in 2 places, one of the contact points sheared almost completely off. In a normal situation, data recovery from a chip in this condition would have required laboratory equipment and several hours of careful work. Cole did not have several hours or laboratory equipment. What he had was an intimate familiarity with Harlan's encryption methodology because he had helped develop it, and the knowledge that Harlan, who had been, in his working years, the most prepared person Cole had ever encountered, would have built redundancy into anything he sent through an emergency channel. He connected the chip fragments through the recovery module he'd brought in his bag. The module was a piece of equipment he had built himself over several evenings at the kitchen table, while Emma did her homework at the other end. She had asked him once what he was building. He had told her it was a data recovery tool. She had said for what, and he had said for when things break, and she had accepted this with the calm practicality that he suspected she had inherited from her mother, who had been the most practically minded person he had ever known. The recovery interface opened. 43% of the chip's data was readable. The rest was corrupted beyond what the module could reconstruct. 43% was enough. The first recoverable file was an audio recording. Cole put it through a speaker small enough to fit in his palm and kept the volume low enough that it was clearly audible in the cold server room, but unlikely to carry through the door. Harlan Carrington's voice came through with the same quality it had carried, over the phone in the lobby, slightly worn at the edges, the particular roughness of a man who had been ill and who knew it. But underneath all of that, the unmistakable precision of someone who had spent his life choosing words deliberately. Cole, if you're hearing this, then something has gone wrong and Trent Maddox has done what Warren told him to do. I want you to know I'm not angry with Maddox. Warren is very good at making people believe they're acting incorrectly when they're acting on his behalf, and Maddox is a professional who trusts his chain of command. I understand that. The chain of command is exactly what Warren has been corrupting. Sloane made a small sound, not quite a word. Cole did not pause the recording. Here is what you need to know. The transaction is structured as a licensing transfer, not a sale, which would require board approval, but a transfer of operational control through a leasing mechanism that Warren's legal team has been building for 14 months. The receiving's entity is a company called Ardent Meridian Partners. On paper, it looks like an independent technology investment firm. It is not. It is a shell built specifically for this transaction, and it traces back through 3 holding layers to a private equity group that Warren has a personal financial stake in. A pause. A breath that sounded like it cost something. The amount involved is $480 million. That number represents not just the licensing value of Sentinel Crown, but access to its back-end architecture, the parts that most of the people who use it don't know exist. Cole glanced at Marissa. She had her phone out and was taking notes, her expression professionally neutral, in the way that meant she was paying very close attention. The back-end architecture, Harlan continued, includes administrative access points that I built in for legitimate emergency management purposes. In the wrong hands, in the hands of an entity that has no obligation to the public interest, those access points become something else. Banking networks use Sentinel Crown's encryption. Hospital records management systems use it. 3 regional transportation authorities and the Transit Data Network for the city of Chicago run on a version of the platform. If operational control is transferred to a private entity without regulatory oversight, those access points can be exploited selectively. Not obviously, not in ways that trigger immediate detection, but systematically over time. Another pause. The people those systems protect will not know they are exposed. They will not know until something happens to them personally, and by the time it does, the connection will be very difficult to trace. The recording ended. The server room was quiet except for the ventilation. Maddox said from near the door, "How long has he known about this?" 4 months, Cole said. Maybe 5. He started noticing irregularities in the Treasury reports around midsummer. Took him several weeks to trace it far enough to be certain it wasn't a legitimate transaction he'd simply forgotten being briefed on. Why didn't he go to the board? Because at least 2 board members are receiving payments from entities connected to Ardent Meridian Partners. He didn't know which 2 at first. He spent time figuring it out. Cole pulled up the second recoverable file, a financial document, partial but enough. By the time he had enough to act, his medical access had been compromised. He realized that the cognitive decline diagnosis that Warren had presented to the board had been built on assessments that were altered after submission. The original assessments showed mild age-related changes, nothing outside normal range for a 68-year-old man. The versions the board received showed something significantly worse. Sloane unfolded her arms. She walked to the workstation and looked at the financial document on the screen. Cole watched her read it, watched her process the column of transactions, the entity names, the dates, the amounts. Her face did not change, but her breathing changed slightly, the almost imperceptible shift of someone absorbing information that was difficult to absorb. "These payments," she said, "the ones going to the physician. 3 of them over 14 months. The smallest is $42,000. For what? The paperwork says consulting. I told Warren that downstairs. There's no record of any consulting work. No deliverables, no meeting minutes, no correspondence. Nothing that a legitimate consulting engagement would generate." Warren didn't react when you said that. "He reacted," Cole said. "Just not in the way you'd notice if you weren't looking for it." Sloane straightened. She turned and looked at Marissa. "Is this enough?" Marissa was quiet for a moment, the professional quiet of someone running a calculation they did not want to get wrong. "For what purpose?" "To stop the transaction. To file for an emergency injunction, I need documentation of financial fraud, evidence of a fiduciary breach, and ideally an authenticated statement from a party with standing. Marissa looked at Cole. Harlan's recording qualifies as an authenticated statement if we can verify the timestamp and the encryption signature. The financial documentation gets us to the fraud question. The fiduciary breach is in the altered medical assessments, but I need the original assessment documents, not the altered versions, to establish that a breach occurred. The originals are in Wisconsin, Cole said. At the facility. Can we get them remotely? Harlan has a secure file system at the facility. If the facility hasn't been compromised, I can reach it through this terminal. He was already turning back to the workstation. That was when Maddox said, Cole. Something in the way he said it made Cole stop. Maddox was looking at the radio. His expression had changed into something that was trying not to show what it felt. Holloway just contacted someone off-network. I only got part of it. They switched frequencies after about 15 seconds. But I heard an address, a road in rural Wisconsin. He looked up. And I heard the words, clear the facility. The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Cole said, how long ago? 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Cole turned back to the terminal and began moving faster. Maddox crossed the room in 3 steps and put his hand on Cole's shoulder, not grabbing, just contact, the gesture of a man who needed to say something directly and wanted to make sure it landed. I did that, he said. I broke that phone. I opened the communication channel. If they found the facility because of what I did. Stop. Cole did not look up from the screen. Sit with that later. Right now I need the facility's coordinates, and I need you to think about how fast you can get there. Pause. Me? You have a car downstairs. Cole pulled up the facility file, found the coordinates, and read them to Maddox. The facility's security protocol requires physical presence. To override it can't be done remotely. If Holloway's people reach it before someone is physically on site, Harlan's security system will lock down automatically and nobody gets in or out until I manually release it from here, which I can do, but it takes time we may not have. He finally looked up at Maddox. You're the only one I can send. Sloane needs to be here. Marissa needs to be here. And I need to be at this terminal. Maddox looked at him. Cole could see the calculation in it, could see the man weighing what he was being asked to do against the weight of what he had already done and what he understood about the consequences of both. If I go, Maddox said slowly, I'm leaving you without security backup. Holloway still has people in this building. I know. And you're going to what? Exactly walk into the board meeting with a partial data recovery and a lawyer and hope it's enough? Something like that. Maddox exhaled through his nose. It was not quite a laugh. You were always planning to go into that meeting. Yes, even when you walked in the front door this morning. The meeting was always the target, Cole said. Everything else has been clearing the path to it. He looked at Maddox steadily. I'm not asking you to do this because I think you owe me anything. I'm asking because you're capable of it and because Sloane Carrington is alone in a facility that someone just directed a team toward. And the most useful thing any person in this room can do about that fact is go get him. Maddox looked at him for another moment. Then he said, if anything happens to that old man because I was too slow. Then we deal with that when it happens, Cole said. Go. Maddox went. The door closed behind him and the server room felt slightly larger in his absence, the way rooms did when a significant presence left them. Sloane watched the door for a moment, then turned back to the workstation. Can you actually reach the board meeting? She asked. The lockdown suspended their voting authority. It didn't dissolve the meeting. They're still up their 41st floor, Conference Suite A. Warren will be trying to find a workaround to the voting suspension. Cole was already pulling up the meeting's administrative record through the isolated terminal. He has 2 options. He can wait out the 6-hour suspension, which he won't do because he knows we have the recording and the financial documentation, and he's losing ground every minute. Or he can find a way to argue that the lockdown trigger was invalid, that the device wasn't legitimately registered to Harlan, or that Harlan's executive status has been formally suspended, which he attempted to establish through the cognitive decline documentation. He paused. He'll go with the second option. It's faster and it plays to what he's already built. Marissa had moved to stand beside Cole, looking at the screen. If he successfully argues the lockdown trigger is invalid, voting authority restores immediately. Yes. How long does he have to make that argument? Depends on how fast his legal team can file the motion. 30-40 minutes if they've been preparing for this contingency, which they have. Cole checked the terminal clock. We have less time than that. Then what do we need? The original medical assessment. The shell company documentation tracing Ardent Meridian Partners back to Warren's personal holdings. And the authentication records for the board documents Warren is going to present as Sloane's authorization for the transfer. He looked at Sloane. He has documents with your signature on them. Sloane went very still. I never signed anything authorizing a transfer to... I know. Your signature was copied. It's a sophisticated copy. It would pass a standard visual inspection and most basic digital verification. But it won't pass a deep authentication check against Sentinel Crown's own signature registry. Because every legitimate executive signature made through Vanguard systems carries an authentication marker that the copy won't have. He turned back to the terminal. I need about 15 minutes to pull everything together. And then we need to go upstairs. Sloane was quiet for a moment. Cole was working, and the room was filled with the mechanical sound of ventilation and the softer sound of someone thinking hard. Can I ask you something? Sloane said. Go ahead. When my father contacted you, why did you say yes? She paused. You'd left. You had a life outside this company. You have a daughter. Could have told him to take it to the authorities and stayed out of it. Cole kept working. He did take it to the authorities. Specifically, he contacted the regulatory office that oversees Sentinel Crown's public infrastructure licensing. They told him the complaint would require a formal investigation process that could take 18 to 24 months, during which time the transaction he was describing would almost certainly be completed under the provisional licensing framework. He pulled up the shell company documentation, partial but traceable. So the authorities were aware and were not going to move fast enough. That's not entirely an answer to what I asked. He glanced at her. She was watching him with the same direct attention she had given him in the lobby. In the lobby, the expression of someone who had learned to ask the question she actually wanted, answered rather than the one that was easier to accept a non-answer to. He thought about how to say it accurately. I spent 9 years in the Navy doing work that I believed was important, he said. After that, I came here and spent 4 years building. Something I also believed was important, not Vanguard specifically, but what Sentinel Crown was supposed to protect. Serves. The people those systems affect. He paused. When your father told me someone was going to turn that into a private extraction mechanism, I thought about the banking networks, the hospitals, the transportation systems. Another pause. I thought about the people who use those systems who will never know they're exposed until it's too late for knowing to help them. He stopped working for a moment and looked at her directly. I also thought about my daughter, he said. She's 9. She's going to be using these systems for the rest of her life. I'd like the world she's using them in to be one where someone with the ability to prevent this particular version of it chose to. Sloane held his gaze. Okay, she said. It was the same word she had used in the maintenance corridor, but it carried more weight now, not just agreement, but something closer to understanding. Specific recognition of a person who had just seen past a surface they had not expected to see past. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it. It's Warren. He's asking me to come to the 41st floor. She read further. He says he has documentation proving the lockdown trigger was invalid and that the board is prepared to proceed with the vote on emergency authority grounds. Cole checked the terminal clock. 22 minutes had passed since Maddox left. He made a fast calculation, partial recovery versus complete recovery, what he had now against what he might be able to add in the next 10 minutes, and what the cost of 10 more minutes was against the risk of arriving upstairs with evidence that was thorough but came too late to matter. How much of what you have is authenticated? Marissa asked, reading his hesitation precisely. Enough, Cole said. Not everything, but enough. Define enough. The recording is authenticated. The shell company documentation is authenticated. Through the second holding layer, I haven't reached the third. The financial payments to the physician are documented. The board meeting records showing which members received payments from Ardent Meridian Partners connected entities are documented. He stood up from the workstation. What I don't have yet is the original medical assessment. Without the original assessment, Warren can argue that the altered version is the authentic one, and that Harlan's emergency device registration should be invalidated on the basis of documented cognitive decline.
Yes.
Which means the lockdown becomes invalid, voting restores, and the board proceeds. Marissa was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Go to the meeting. I'll stay here and keep working on the assessment records. If I find them, I'll transmit them to your tablet in the room." Cole looked at her. "I know what I'm looking for," she said, with the slight impatience of someone who did not enjoy having their competence questioned. "I've been Vanguard's general counsel for 11 years. I know this company's documentation architecture almost as well as you know its security architecture." She sat down at the workstation with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who decided something and did not need further discussion about it. "Go." Cole picked up his bag. Sloane had already moved to the door. She was holding it open, looking back at him with an expression that was not quite steady, but was working very hard at steady. The expression of a person who had been running on adrenaline and professional discipline for the past several hours and was beginning to feel the cost of both. "I need to tell you something," she said as Cole reached the door, "before we walk into that room." He stopped. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "Not specifically not what you've told me today. But I felt it, 6-7 months ago. The Treasury reports had a quality to them that felt edited. Not wrong exactly, just arranged. Like someone had made decisions about what to show me and what to leave out." She paused. "I told myself I was being paranoid. Warren had been running financial operations longer than I'd been an adult, and he had never given me a reason to doubt his judgment, and I decided it was me. That I was looking for problems because I felt insecure about my position, and I was projecting that onto the reports." She was not looking for absolution from him. He could tell that from her voice. She was stating a fact that she had clearly spent some time sitting with, and she was stating it because she wanted him to know it before they walked into a room together, not because she needed him to make her feel better about it. "You're telling me this now," he said, "because you want to walk into that room clear." "Yes." He nodded once. "Then walk in clear." She let the door fall closed behind them as they stepped into the corridor. The building was different now than it had been 2 hours ago, still the same architecture, the same polished surfaces and controlled climate, but the quality of the silence had changed. 2 hours ago, it had been the managed quiet of a functioning corporate environment. Now it was the tight silence of an institution, holding its breath, staff on every floor, aware that something significant was happening in the upper reaches of the building without being certain what it was or what it required of them. Cole and Sloane moved through the service level and reached the utility stair. Cole's knee protested the stairs with a consistency that he had stopped arguing with years ago. He just climbed at the pace that worked and made up time where he could. On the 36th floor landing, he heard something. Stopped. Put a hand out. Sloane stopped behind him. 2 floors above them, the distinct sound of boots moving in a coordinated pattern across a hard surface, the particular rhythm of a security sweep. Not random. Structured. "Holloway's people are on 38, Cole said quietly. "Between us and the elevator bank we need. Can we go around them?" Cole ran the building's layout through his memory, the same way he had been running it all morning, the familiarity of a place he had spent 4 years inside, becoming now the only real advantage they had. There's a cross corridor on 37 that connects to the executive stair on the north side. It's not on the standard floor plan, but it requires an access code to open. "What's the code?" He looked at her. "Your father's employee number. He chose it himself when we installed that door. Said it was the one number he'd never forget." Sloane looked at him. "He never told me that. He told me there were things about this building he had never told anyone else. He said he liked that there were places inside his own company that only he and the man who built them knew about." Cole paused. "Now you know." She absorbed that for a moment. "Then, tell me the number." He told her. They moved. The cross corridor on 37 was narrower than the main passages, lit by the same emergency amber red that had colored the entire building since the lobby that morning, and it smelled of the specific age of a door that had not been opened, frequently dry, faintly metallic, the smell of a place that existed for contingency rather than regular use. The access pad accepted the code on the first attempt. The door opened with a resistance that suggested its hinges had not been exercised in some time. On the north side, the executive stair went directly to 41. Cole and Sloane climbed it. At the top, Cole checked the stairwell door before opening it, listened for movement on the other side, waited 15 seconds, heard nothing structured. He opened the door. The 41st floor corridor was empty. At the far end, through the glass walls of the main conference suite, he could see the board. 12 members around the long table. Warren Pike standing at the presentation end, gesturing at something on the display screen. A legal representative, Cole, did not recognize seated beside Warren with a document file open in front of him. Cole looked at the scene for a moment. The countdown on the lockdown protocol, the 6-hour window before voting authority automatically restored, would expire in approximately 40 minutes. But Warren clearly had not waited for that. He had found his workaround. The legal representative's presence and the document file told Cole that a formal motion had already been filed, probably in the last 15 minutes, arguing the lockdown trigger's invalidity. If the motion was successful, the board could vote within minutes. Cole's tablet buzzed, a message from Marissa. He looked at it. Found the original assessment file. Transmitting now. Give me 3 minutes. 3 minutes. He looked at the conference room. Sloane was standing beside him. She had seen the board, seen Warren, and her face had gone through something. He did not have a name for the specific expression of a person confronting proof of something they had been hoping, against reason, might not be entirely true. He understood that expression. He had worn it himself in different circumstances, and he knew that there was nothing useful you could say to someone in the middle of it. 3 minutes, he said. What? Marissa needs 3 minutes. She has the original medical assessment. Sloane looked at the conference room. Warren isn't going to give us 3 minutes. No. Cole looked at her. But you might be able to get them. He paused. You're the CEO of this company. You have the right to enter that meeting, address that board, and speak before any vote is taken. Warren cannot legally prevent that. He paused. It won't be comfortable. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then Sloane Carrington straightened. Not the performed straightening of someone manufacturing confidence, but the quieter, more genuine adjustment of a person deciding something real about who they were going to be in the next 3 minutes. Open the door, she said. Cole opened it. Sloane walked into the conference room ahead of him, and every head at the table turned. And Warren Pike looked up from his presentation with an expression that moved through several calculations in less than a second and arrived at something that was trying very hard to remain controlled. Sloane. Warren's voice was smooth. I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about... Sit down, Warren. The room went silent. Warren did not sit. Sloane walked to the head of the table, not Warren's end, where the presentation screen was, but the CEO's end, where the chair that had her name on the placard had been sitting empty. Put her hands on the back of that chair and looked at the 12 board members with the steady, unflinching attention of someone who had decided they were done being managed. My name is Sloane Carrington, she said. I'm the CEO of this company. And before anyone in this room takes any action under any authority emergency, or otherwise, I have something to say. Warren said, the board has already received documentation showing that your authorization of the Ardent Meridian Minus. I didn't authorize anything, Sloane said. And in approximately 2 minutes, you're going to understand exactly what I mean by that. She looked at Cole, who had moved to the side of the room and was watching the tablet in his hand. Mr. Barrett. Cole looked at the tablet. Marissa's transmission was coming through. He looked up at the board, at Warren, at the legal representative, who had stopped writing and was watching the room with the alert caution of someone recalculating their exposure. And then the conference room doors, the main doors, the ones facing the elevator bank, opened. What came through them was not what anyone in the room had expected. Trent Maddox came through first. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder. There was a cut above his eyebrow that had stopped bleeding, but not recently, and he was walking with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain they were not going to let stop them. Behind him, moving slowly but moving under his own authority, supported by a single forearm crutch, and dressed in the practical clothing of a man who had not been near an executive wardrobe in several months, was Harlan Carrington. He was thinner than Cole remembered. The illness had taken something from the surface of him, the particular solidity that powerful men accumulated over decades of being taken seriously. But his eyes were exactly the same, clear, specific. The eyes of a man who had built something from nothing and who understood, in the way that only builders understood, precisely what it meant for someone to try to take it apart. He looked at Warren Pike. Warren looked back. And the conference room, 42 floors above a rain-soaked Chicago street, went so quiet that Cole could hear Harlan Carrington's crutch on the polished floor as the old man walked toward the table where someone had spent 4 months trying to bury him. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The conference room had the quality of a space where everyone present had simultaneously run out of prepared responses, where the script that each person had arrived with had just become useless, and the gap between what they had expected and what was actually standing in the doorway was wide enough that it required a few seconds just to process the distance. Harlan Carrington let them have those seconds. He moved to the table slowly, and Cole watched him do it, watched the way the old man carried the physical difficulty of it without apology. Without performance, without the self-conscious acknowledgement that would have invited pity. He simply moved at the pace he could move and arrived where he intended to arrive. And when he reached the table, he set his forearm crutch against the edge and stood without it, because he had clearly decided that whatever happened in the next hour, he was going to do it on his own feet. The cut above Maddox's eyebrow had started bleeding again slightly. Maddox did not touch it. He took a position near the door and stood there with the alert stillness of a man who had driven 4 hours round trip to rural Wisconsin, encountered people who did not want him to succeed, and arrived back in this room with Harlan Carrington alive beside him. The torn jacket and the cut and the particular set of his jaw said that the trip had not been without incident. He had not mentioned any of it. Cole had not asked yet, because the room did not have space for that conversation at this moment. Warren Pike had not moved. He was still standing at the presentation end of the table, and Cole was watching him with the specific attention he reserved for situations where the most dangerous variable was a person who had not yet decided what they were going to do. Warren was processing. Cole could see it the fast internal accounting of a man who had spent months building something that had just suffered a foundational collapse, running the options, testing each one against the new landscape of the room. He had options. Cole knew he had options, because Warren Pike was not the kind of man who built a 4-month conspiracy without contingencies. The question was which one he was going to reach for first. Harlan looked at the board members. 12 people, most of whom had known him for decades, several of whom had been in that room when he made the decisions that built Vanguard into what it was. 2 of whom he knew had been receiving payments from accounts connected to Warren's network for the past 18 months. He did not look at those 2 specifically. Not yet. "My name is Harlan Carrington," he said. His voice had the slight roughness Cole had heard in the recording, but also, now, in the room. Something that the recording had not captured the specific weight of a man who was angry in a way he had been carrying for a long time, and had reached the point where he was done, carrying it quietly. "I am the founder of this company. I hold 31% of outstanding shares. I'm not cognitively impaired. I'm not incapacitated. And I'm not dead, which I understand has been inconvenient for some people in this room." One of the board members, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Vance, whom Cole recognized from Harlan's files as one of the longest-serving independent directors, let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Not amused exactly. The exhale of someone who had been sitting in a room for 2 hours receiving information that had not felt right and was now experiencing the specific relief of the room, shifting back to something that made sense. Warren said, "Harlan?" He stopped, started again. "I understand this looks. Warren." Harlan's voice did not rise. "Don't," the same word Sloane had used. Cole noted it. Something in the family, that particular economy of refusal. Harlan looked at Cole. "You got the recording. 43% of the chip," Cole said. "Enough. The financial documentation? Authenticated through the second holding layer. Marissa has been working on the third. At that, Marissa Keene came through the conference room's side door, the one that connected to the secondary executive corridor, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who had accomplished what they set out to accomplish and was ready to show their work. She had a tablet and a printed document set, and she set both on the table in front of Patricia Vance without preamble. "The original cognitive assessment for Harlan Carrington," Marissa said, "prepared by Dr. Sandra Okafor at Northwestern, dated 14 months ago. It shows mild age-appropriate changes, no indicators of clinical cognitive decline, and a recommendation for annual monitoring. The version this board received 3 months later, purportedly from the same physician, shows a substantially different picture. She set a second document beside the first. Side by side, you can see the alterations. The formatting metadata in the altered version shows it was last modified 11 days after Dr. Okafor's original submission date by a user account registered to Vanguard's Executive Administrative Network. She paused. Specifically to Warren Pike's administrative account. The legal representative who had come with Warren quietly closed his document file. That was the tell. Cole had been waiting for it, the moment when Warren's own legal support recalculated their exposure and began creating distance. The file closing was a small gesture, but it said everything. Whoever that attorney was, he had just decided that his professional obligation to his client did not extend to the territory they were now entering. Warren said, "Those documents were prepared by a third-party medical consulting firm at the board's request. My account was used because I was the executive liaison for the minor." The consulting firm, Marissa said, is a subsidiary of an entity called Corrigan Medical Analytics. Corrigan Medical Analytics shares 3 directors with Ardent Meridian Partners. She looked at the board. The same Ardent Meridian Partners that is the receiving entity for a $480 million licensing transfer that this board was about to vote to approve today under emergency authority, using documents bearing Ms. Carrington's forged signature. Patricia Vance said, "Whose signature?" Sloane Carrington's. The authorization documents Warren submitted to this board, showing CEO approval for the Ardent Meridian transaction, her signature on those documents was copied. Marissa looked at Cole. Mr. Barrett Cole had been at the side of the room with his tablet, working through the last piece while the room had been reorganizing around Harlan's arrival. He had been waiting for this moment, and he was ready for it, but he also recognized that how he presented it mattered not for dramatic effect but for clarity, because the people in this room needed to understand exactly what they were looking at and why it was conclusive. He walked to the presentation display at the head of the table and connected his tablet to the room's system. Warren was still standing near the display. He did not move away, which Cole found interesting. The man's capacity for maintaining his position physically even when every other position had collapsed was almost admirable in a specific, useless way. Cole pulled up the authentication comparison on the display. "Sentinel Crown," he said. "The cybersecurity platform this company builds and operates includes an executive signature authentication system that I designed 7 years ago. Every legitimate executive action taken through Vanguard's digital infrastructure generates what I called a time shadow, a layered authentication marker embedded in the transaction record that includes a timestamp verified against 3 independent network nodes, a biometric confirmation hash, and a behavioral pattern signature derived from the executive's historical interaction data." He let the board look at the display. When you sign something legitimately through Vanguard's system, you generate a time shadow. It's invisible to the user. It's not something you can replicate by copying a signature. It requires you to actually be present in the system at that moment, making that action. He put up 2 records side by side. This is a legitimate document bearing Sloane Carrington's signature, her actual authorization of Vanguard's Q3 infrastructure budget from 6 months ago. The time shadow is here, here, and here. He indicated 3 points in the metadata layer. This is the authorization document for the Ardent Meridian transfer, which Warren submitted to this board as evidence of CEO approval. He indicated the corresponding positions in the second record. No time shadow on any of the 3 markers. The signature was placed on the document externally, outside of Vanguard's system, and the authentication layer was never generated because the actual executive never made the actual action. The room was very quiet. Cole looked at Warren. Warren was looking at the display with an expression that had moved, finally past calculated control. Not collapsed. The man was too composed for collapse, but for the first time since Cole had walked into this building that morning, Warren Pike looked like someone whose options had genuinely run out. Then Cole's tablet registered a new command being executed through Vanguard's administrative network. He looked at it. Remote deletion. Warren had activated a remote deletion command through a backup administrative credential a secondary account that Cole had not known Warren possessed, which meant Warren had obtained it through channels that bypassed Vanguard's standard credential management process. The command was targeting the server room on the 14th floor, the isolated network node, the copies of the shell company documentation, and financial records that Marissa had been accessing. Cole looked at the command for a moment, then he almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "What are you doing?" Sloane asked quietly from beside him. "Nothing," Cole said. "I'm letting him run it." She looked at him, turned the tablet so she could see the screen. "I made a copy of every file accessed on that terminal this morning. Offline, before we left the server room. The copy is on a physically separate device that isn't connected to Vanguard's network." He watched the deletion command execute through the terminal display, watched it process, confirm, report completion. Every file he just deleted existed in 2 places. He only knew about one of them. He paused, and every deletion command he just executed created a system action log entry tied to his administrative credentials. Time-stamped, authenticated, entered automatically into Vanguard's immutable audit record, which is maintained on a separate, secure server that requires unanimous board authorization to modify. He looked at the tablet. He just used a covert secondary account to destroy evidence in the middle of an active board proceeding. That action is now itself documented evidence. Warren had lowered his phone. His expression was not readable anymore in the way. Expressions usually weren't readable when the person wearing them was working through something they had not prepared for. Cole had seen that look before in different places, on different faces. It was the particular expression of someone who had just understood that the tools they reached for to fix a problem had become additional problems. Cole turned back to the board. "I want to be straightforward about something," he said. "I didn't come here today to win anything. I came because Sloane Carrington asked me to come, and because the systems that Sentinel Crown protects serve real people not in the abstract, but specifically. Hospital records that belong to sick people, banking networks that hold the savings of ordinary families, transportation systems that move millions of people every day through cities where they're trusting that the infrastructure works as advertised." He looked around the table. "Whatever happens in this room today, those systems need to continue to serve the people they were built to serve. That's the only thing I actually care about." Patricia Vance said, "Mr. Barrett, the documents you've presented, the shell company structure, the payment records, the authentication analysis, are these complete? Are there gaps?" "Yes," Cole said. "The shell company documentation is authenticated through 2 holding layers. I was unable to fully authenticate the 3rd before we came upstairs. The financial payment records are documented, but a full forensic accounting will identify additional transactions that I haven't had access to. What's here is enough to establish the pattern and the intent. A complete picture will require the formal investigation. And the recording? The one from Harlan's device? Authenticated through Sentinel Crown's own encryption signature verification. The timestamp, voice pattern, and encryption key are all confirmed against Harlan's registered credentials." Vance nodded slowly. She looked at Harlan. "Harlan, I want to hear it from you directly. Are you here voluntarily and under your own cognition and authority?" Harlan looked at her with something that was almost warmth, the recognition of a person who asked the right question rather than the convenient one. "Patricia, I've known you for 26 years. You've never once asked me anything you didn't actually need the answer to." He straightened. "Yes. I am here voluntarily, under my own authority, in full possession of my faculties, and I want this board to freeze every executive action Warren Pike has initiated in the past 14 months pending a complete forensic review." Vance looked down the table at the other board members. The particular quality of silence that followed was not the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of a room that had made up its mind and was waiting for one person to say it first. Warren said, He stopped. Everyone looked at him. He had started to say something and had stopped, and Cole watched the man in that moment with the same attention he had been giving him all morning, not hostile, not triumphant, just watching, because even now Warren Pike was making calculations, and understanding what those calculations were might still matter. Warren reached into his jacket pocket and produced a document. Cole recognized the format before he could read the content. He had seen that format in the materials. Harlan had sent him the specific document template used for internal board filings of formal accusation. "This," Warren said, and his voice was steady in a way that required audible effort, "is a formal accusation of financial conspiracy and unauthorized system access directed at Bryce Holloway. It documents Holloway's role in coordinating the surveillance modification, the credential abuse, and the contact with external personnel used to access the Wisconsin facility this morning." He set it on the table. "I have been aware of Holloway's actions for some time. I was building a case internally before I had enough to bring to the board. What happened this morning forced my hand." Cole looked at the document. Then he looked at the door. Because Cole had been listening, in the back of his attention, to the ambient sounds of the floor, the particular movement patterns of people in corridors, the sound of doors, the subtle audio landscape of 42 floors of a building in emergency lockdown. And 30 seconds ago, he had registered the sound of someone stopping outside the conference room's east entrance and not coming in. The east entrance was not the main door. It was the secondary access point, the one Marissa had come through, which opened onto a corridor that connected to the private elevator reserved for senior executives. Warren's private elevator. "Bryce," Cole said, loudly enough to carry to the door, "come in." Silence. Then the east door opened. Bryce Holloway was a large man, as Cole had established that morning in Conference C, and he was still large, but something about him was different now than it had been then. In Conference C, he had carried authority, the practiced, worn-in authority of someone who occupied a position of command and had occupied it long enough that it had become structural. Now, standing in the doorway of the 41st floor conference suite, that authority was gone. What was left was just a man, tired and calculating, holding a phone in one hand with the particular grip of someone who had been reading something on it that had changed the situation they were operating in. He looked at Warren. Warren looked back. The document on the table, Warren's formal accusation, sat between them like a physical object in the conversation, and Cole watched Holloway's eyes go to it and register exactly what it was, because Bryce Holloway had spent enough years in institutional hierarchies to recognize a formal accusation on sight. "He filed it already," Holloway said. He said it quietly, more to himself than to the room. The voice of someone confirming something they had suspected. Warren said, "Bryce, this is not, you told me last week." Holloway said, still quiet, that if anything went wrong, you had documentation that proved I acted independently, that you had no knowledge of the surveillance modification or the Wisconsin operation. He looked at the document. "You weren't building a case against me. You were building a case for me to take the fall." Warren's jaw tightened. "That's not an accurate characterization of." "I did things for you," Holloway said. "I moved people around this building for you. I changed the camera configuration for you. I sent a team to Wisconsin for you." His voice had not risen, but the quality of it had changed, the particular shift of someone who has been operating on a set of assumptions that have just been removed. "You told me this was about protecting the company. You told me Harlan was being manipulated by people outside Vanguard, and that Barrett was part of it, and that Sloane needed to be insulated from bad information before the board meeting. You made it sound like..." He stopped. "Like you were following legitimate orders," Cole said. Holloway looked at him. There was no hostility in it. Just the flat attention of a man working through the specific shame of having been used. "Yes," Holloway said. "That's what he does," Cole said. He was not trying to make Holloway feel better, and he was not trying to manipulate him. He was just stating a fact that was relevant. He's very good at constructing a version of events where the people doing the actual work believe they're acting correctly. Skill. It's also what makes it difficult to prosecute without people who were inside the operation explaining what they were told and what they understood. The room was perfectly still. Holloway looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he looked at the board, at Harlan, at Sloane. Then he walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He set his phone face down on the table in front of him and folded his hands over it and said, "To no one specifically and everyone generally, what do you need to know?" Warren moved. He moved toward the east door toward his private elevator, and it was not a run exactly. Taught the fast, controlled movement of a man who had made a decision and was acting on it before he could think past it. the movement of someone who had run out of room and was heading for the only exit that remained. The elevator panel lit up when he pressed the call button. The display read, "Access denied, emergency lockdown protocol, active executive override suspended." Warren pressed it again, "Access denied." He pressed it a third time, and the fourth time, and Cole watched him do it from across the room with the same patient attention he had been paying, all morning, to the details that other people weren't tracking. And he thought about the afternoon, 7 years ago, when he had sat across a table from Warren Pike in a meeting not unlike this one, and told him that a specific vulnerability in Sentinel Crown's early architecture needed to be disclosed, needed to be patched and reported to the regulatory lobby bodies that oversaw the public systems the platform protected. And Warren had told him, with the same smooth, reasonable certainty he had used all morning, that the vulnerability was minor, manageable, and that disclosure would create unnecessary alarm among clients who did not have the technical background to contextualize the risk appropriately. Cole had left the company 3 weeks later. He had always wondered in the years since whether staying would have changed what happened today. Standing in this room, he thought probably not. The machinery Warren had built was too specific, too patient, too carefully constructed. It had required time that Cole's presence would not have prevented. What had made today possible was not that Cole had stayed. What had made today possible was that Harlan had not stopped paying attention and had reached out to the right person when he needed to, and that Cole had answered. The whole of it, really. The elevator did not open. Warren stood at the panel with his hand on the call button and did not press it a fifth time. He stood there for a moment that went on slightly longer than was comfortable to watch, and then he turned and faced the room. Something in his face had finally settled. Not peace exactly. Just the specific blankness of a person who has reached the end of their options and understands it. "Patricia Vance," said Warren. "Sit down." He sat down. Cole looked at his tablet. The transmission records were intact. The deletion command Warren had run from his backup credential had generated exactly the documentation trail Cole had told Sloane it would: a detailed log of unauthorized system access, destruction of records during an active board proceeding, use of a covert administrative credential obtained outside standard Vanguard processes. Every entry timestamped, every entry authenticated. Every entry sitting in the immutable audit record that Warren had apparently forgotten Cole had designed to be immutable specifically because he had understood, even years ago, that the most dangerous threats to a system came from people who already had administrative access. Cole sent the transmission package the complete evidence file, everything from the server room, everything Marissa had recovered, the authentication analysis, the recording, the financial documentation, the deletion log to 3 destinations simultaneously, Marissa's secure external archive, the regulatory oversight office that Harlan had originally contacted 6 months ago, and a federal financial crimes division contact whose address Harlan had included in his original message with the note. This one actually picks up the phone. Then he set the tablet down on the conference room table and stepped back from the display. Sloane had been standing near the CEO's chair throughout, and Cole looked at her now and found her watching the room with an expression that was different from anything she had shown that morning, not the managed professionalism of the lobby, not the controlled focus of the maintenance corridors, not even the particular steadiness she had found before walking through the conference room door. This was something quieter and more complicated. The expression of a person who had just watched the framework around them shift into something they had not known was possible and were not yet sure what to do with. She looked at her father. Harlan was watching her from across the table. He had not said much since his initial statement to the board, which Cole thought was characteristic. He had always been a man who understood that the right time to speak was when the speaking would accomplish something that silence could not, and that silence was undervalued in most rooms. "You should have told me," Sloane said. Not accusing. Just saying it. "Yes," Harlan said, 4 months ago. "When you first found out." "Yes, why didn't you?" Pause. "Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me over Warren. He'd been earning your trust for years, and I'd been—" Harlan stopped. Started again, more carefully. "I haven't always made it easy to tell me something I don't want to hear. I know that about myself. I was afraid that if I came to you with half a case, and Warren got in front of it first, you'd side with him on instinct, and I'd lose the ability to finish building what I needed. Sloane looked at him for a long moment. So instead you sent someone I'd never met, she said, to walk into my building unannounced on the morning of my most important board meeting, get into a confrontation with my security director, and trigger a company-wide lockdown. Cole had a plan, Harlan said. The phone breaking was an accident. The lockdown it triggered was not an accident. Cole built that protocol. A slight pause. The phone was an accident, but I knew Trent was going to do something impulsive with it. Cole factored that in. Cole, who had not expected to become part of this particular conversation, said, I factored in the possibility of it. I didn't know for certain. You built a contingency. I built several contingencies. Sloane looked at Cole. Then she looked at her father. Then she did something that Cole had not seen her do once. In the entire morning, she let out a breath that was not controlled, not managed, not part of any professional posture, just a breath. Kind that came out when a person had been holding something for a long time and had finally set it down. Okay, she said. The third time she had said that word today, and each time it had carried more weight than the time before. Then she turned to the board. Cole had been wondering, in the back of his mind, how Sloane Carrington was going to handle this moment. Not the board meeting, not the evidence, not Warren. Those were all, in their way, manageable. What he had been wondering about was this, how she was going to handle the specific exposure of having trusted the wrong person completely, of having ignored signals she had noticed and talked herself out of having been, for months, CEO of a company whose internal machinery was being used against her without her knowledge. The professional response was to lead with the facts and let the facts carry the weight and stay above the personal admission. The harder response was something else. Sloane said, I want to address this board directly. Not about Warren and not about what Cole Barrett has presented, because that documentation speaks for itself and the investigation will establish what the investigation establishes. She paused. I want to address the fact that 6 months ago I noticed something in our Treasury reporting that did not sit right with me. I noticed it, I flagged it internally to myself, and I chose not to pursue it because I decided that my discomfort was a product of my own insecurity rather than an accurate reading of something actually wrong. She looked around the table. I was wrong about that, and if I had acted on what I noticed instead of explaining it away, we might not have gotten to this morning. Patricia Vance said quietly, Sloane, I'm not asking for anything, Sloane said. I'm not explaining or excusing. I'm telling you because this board should know what kind of CEO I intend to be going forward, and part of that is being the kind of person who doesn't protect her own ego at the expense of accurate information. She paused. If you decide, on the basis of this morning, that I'm not the right person to lead this company, I want you to make that decision on full information, including that. The room was quiet. Then Harlan said, Patricia, I'd like to call for a board vote on the immediate suspension of Warren Pike's executive authority pending investigation, the cancellation of the Ardent Meridian licensing transfer, and the confirmation of Sloane Carrington's authority as Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Meridian Group. He looked at Sloane when he said the last part, and something in his expression did not have a clean name, but was not difficult to understand. I'll cast my 31% in favor, Vance said seconded. She looked at the rest of the board. All in favor? It was not unanimous. 2 members did not raise their hands, the 2 that Harlan's documentation had identified as receiving payments from Ardent Meridian's connected entities. They sat with their hands on the table. They sat with their hands on the table and their eyes on the surface in front of them, and their silence said everything it needed to say about what the investigation would eventually find. The rest voted yes. When it was done, Vance noted the outcome formally for the record and closed her portfolio with the decisive click of a woman who had handled enough difficult rooms to know when one had reached its conclusion. Across the table, Warren Pike sat with his hands in his lap and said nothing. Holloway, beside him, had spent the last 30 minutes answering questions from Marissa about the specific sequence of instructions he had received and from whom, and doing so with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had decided that if he was going to account for himself, he was going to do it completely. Cole had listened to enough of it to understand that Holloway had genuinely not known the full scope of what he was participating in, had known, uncomfortably, that the instructions he was following were irregular, but had not known about the shell company structure, the forged documents, or the medical record alterations. He had told himself the story Warren gave him and had chosen, at several moments, not to look too hard at the parts that did not quite fit. Cole understood that. He did not excuse it, but he understood it. His tablet buzzed. A message from the federal contact. Receipt confirmed. Response team in transit. Estimated arrival 40 minutes. Cole sent fax a single word, received. Then he walked to the side of the room where Maddox was standing and stopped beside him. Maddox had not spoken much since he came through the door with Harlan. He had answered the room's questions about the Wisconsin facility, briefly and factually 4 people, not Vanguard employees, who had been sent to disable the facility's communication systems and secure Harlan's location. Maddox had arrived before they finished their work. There had been a confrontation. Maddox had not gone into detail about the confrontation, and the cut above his eyebrow and the torn jacket went into detail for him. Harlan was alive. The 4 people were not, Cole inferred, in a condition to be continuing their assignment. You did well, Cole said. Maddox did not look at him. He was watching the room. He was sitting in a room the size of a large bathroom with a nurse who hadn't been paid in 2 weeks and no one coming to check on him. Someone had cut the external communication lines 3 days ago. A pause. He was very calm about it. That sounds like him. He asked me your name when I walked in. I told him. He said Cole came, like he'd been expecting it. Maddox was quiet for a moment. Like he'd known you would. Cole said nothing to that. Maddox finally looked at him. The cut above his eyebrow had dried again. His jacket was still torn. He looked tired in the way that was different from sleepiness, the bone-level tired of someone who had pushed past what was easy and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. I need to surrender my credentials, Maddox said. To the board. Formally. I destroyed evidence in an active security proceeding. I acted on a briefing I should have verified. I know, Cole said. I need to do it anyway. I know that too. Cole looked at him. It's the right thing. Maddox nodded once, the same short, sharp nod from the corridor that morning. He straightened, crossed the room, and approached Patricia Vance. Cole watched him hand over his security director's credentials, the badge, the access cards, the administrative key fob, and say something too quiet to hear from across the room. Vance listened, nodded, said something back. Maddox nodded again and stepped away. Came back to where Cole was standing. She said the board will review my role in the investigation, he said. She said if my involvement is established as operating in good faith under bad information, there's a path back. He paused. Yes, Cole said, if Maddox absorbed that. What about you? He asked. What happens to you now? Cole thought about his car in the parking structure 3 blocks from Vanguard's building. About the drive back to the suburbs. About Emma's school getting out at 3:15, and Janet, who was on his emergency contact list and who had his daughter's pickup covered for today, because he had arranged it that morning before he left. Because that was the kind of thing you arranged when you had been a parent long enough to understand that the most important preparation was the kind you did before you needed it. I go home, Cole said. That's it? That's it for today. Maddox looked at him. That's I don't know. I expected something more. That's usually how it goes, Cole said. And he meant it genuinely, without self-deprecation, just the honest statement of a man who had learned that the shape of a day that mattered rarely matched the shape people expected it to have. It usually looked like driving home on a highway in the rain, thinking about what to make for dinner, with an ache in your knee and a very ordinary Tuesday waiting for you on the other side of an extraordinary morning. Across the room, Sloane was sitting beside her father. Not talking, just sitting. Harlan's hand was on the table, and Sloane's hand was near his, not quite touching, in the specific proximity of people who are not yet sure how to close the last inch of a distance that has been open for too long. Cole did not watch them for long. That was theirs. Picked up his bag. He picked up the pieces of the broken phone from where he had placed them in the breast pocket of his jacket that morning after retrieving them from the lobby floor, and he set them on the conference room table near the presentation display. Because they were Harlan's, and they belonged here and not in his jacket. Then he walked toward the main conference room doors. Behind him, the room continued its business, Marissa, coordinating with Vance on the formal record of the vote, Holloway continuing his account to the people who needed to hear it, Warren Pike sitting in the specific silence of a man waiting for the next thing to happen to him. Cole pushed through the doors. The 41st floor corridor was quiet. The emergency lighting had been running for hours and had taken on the quality of normality that unusual things acquired when they persisted long enough. The amber red no longer seemed alarming, just the color of the air. He walked to the elevator bank. The lockdown suspension would expire in 18 minutes. He would need to wait or take the stairs. His knee made the calculation for him. He stood at the elevator bank and waited and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Chicago in November, still raining, the gray lake barely visible through the low clouds, and thought about nothing in particular for a few minutes, which was something he had learned to do after years' situations that required thinking about everything in particular at great speed. The building breathed around him, the ventilation, the mechanical systems, 42 floors of infrastructure that he had spent 4 years building and 7 years away from, and one long morning fighting through. He knew this building in his bones, and standing here in its upper corridor, he felt the specific, complicated feeling of a thing that had been yours and was no longer yours, and had needed you one more time anyway. His phone buzzed. A message from Janet, Emma's home. She made toast. She said to ask if you got her cheese. Cole looked at the message for a moment. Then he typed back, "Tell her I forgot. I'll get it tomorrow." A pause. Then Janet, she says, "Okay, but you better." Cole put his phone in his pocket. 18 minutes passed. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in, pressed the lobby button, and watched the 41st floor disappear as the doors closed. The elevator reached the lobby in 40 seconds. Cole stepped out into a space that had changed considerably since the morning. The emergency lighting had been replaced by the building's standard overhead system, white and clean and honest, the way the lobby had looked before any of this started. The marble floor still showed a faint mark near the reception desk where Harlan's phone had hit it, a small arc of scuffing that the cleaning crew had not yet gotten to. Cole noticed it the way he noticed most things without drama, just registered and filed. The security personnel in the lobby were different people than the ones who had been there at 8:15 that morning. The federal response team had arrived 32 minutes after Cole left the 41st floor, and their presence had reorganized the ground floor with the efficient thoroughness of people who had done this kind of work before, and had no particular interest in doing it slowly. Warren Pike had come down in the elevator 40 minutes after Cole, flanked by 2 investigators and his personal attorney, who had arrived looking like a man who had received a phone call he had not wanted to receive and had come anyway, because that was the job. Cole had not watched Warren leave the building. He had been in his car by then, on the highway, the heater running, the radio off, Chicago shrinking in the rearview mirror. The drive home had taken 50 minutes in the rain. Emma had been at the kitchen table doing homework when he walked in. She had looked up, looked at him for a moment the way children looked at parents when they were assessing something they couldn't quite articulate, and then said, "You forgot the cheese." "I forgot the cheese," he confirmed. "Janet said you would." Janet was right. Emma had looked at him for another moment, the particular focused attention of a 9-year-old, who noticed more than adults generally gave her credit for. "Are you okay?" Cole had set his bag down and sat in the chair across from her, and looked at her homework fractions, which she found irritating, and said, "Yeah, I'm okay. Did your work thing go okay?" It went okay. She had accepted this and gone back to her fractions, and Cole had sat there at the kitchen table in the ordinary quiet of an ordinary suburban evening, and felt, slowly and without fanfare, the long morning release its grip on him. Not all at once. It didn't work that way. But incrementally, the way tension left a muscle that had been held too long in stages, reluctantly, until eventually you noticed it was gone. He made pasta for dinner because it was what they had, and because Emma had opinions about pasta that were reliable and comforting, and they ate at the kitchen table with the homework pushed to one side, and Emma told him about her school day in the meandering, this associative way of children whose school days contain multitudes, and Cole listened with the full attention he always tried to bring to these conversations, because he understood, in a way that had taken years and some loss to fully understand, that they were not small. That night, after Emma was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before he finished it and thought, for a while, about the shattered phone on the conference room table. He had not meant to think about it. It arrived the way things did, when your mind finally had space to return to them. The phone was in pieces. It could not be repaired. But everything it had carried, the recording, the authentication credentials, the emergency protocol, the 6 hours of suspended voting authority that had bought them exactly the time they needed, all of it had survived. The vessel had broken, and the contents had not. He thought there was something in that worth sitting with, though he was tired enough that he could not quite work out exactly what it was, and eventually he went to bed and left the thought for another time. In the weeks that followed, the investigation moved faster than these things usually moved, which Cole attributed partly to the completeness of the documentation and partly to the fact that the regulatory office he had transmitted to had been, as Harlan described, the kind that actually picked up the phone. Warren Pike was formally charged with financial fraud, conspiracy to commit securities manipulation, unauthorized access to protected medical records, and 4 additional counts related to the shell company structure and the forged authorization documents. His legal team entered a not guilty plea and began constructing a defense that, from what Cole understood through Marissa's periodic updates, leaned heavily on the argument that the alterations to the medical assessments had been made by his administrative staff without his direct knowledge. Nobody who had been in the conference room on the 41st floor found this argument persuasive, including, apparently, the 2 board members who had been receiving payments from Ardent Meridian's connected entities, both of whom had quietly engaged their own separate legal counsel and begun cooperation discussions within 72 hours of the board meeting. Bryce Holloway did not fight. He retained an attorney who advised him to cooperate fully, which he did completely, and without the selective omissions that characterized the cooperation of people who were still, at some level, protecting something. His account of the instructions he had received, the actions he had taken, and the specific moments at which he had chosen not to ask the questions he should have asked was detailed, and, by Marissa's assessment, credible in a way that distinguished him clearly from the conspiracy's architects. He was charged, ultimately, with 2 counts related to the surveillance modification and the Wisconsin operation. His cooperation was noted in the filing. The $480 million transfer to Ardent Meridian Partners was permanently canceled. The provisional licensing agreement voided under the fraud provisions of Vanguard's corporate charter. Ardent Meridian Partners itself was the subject of a separate federal proceeding aimed at unwinding the shell structure and recovering the funds that had been moved through it over the course of the conspiracy's operation. That process, Marissa told Cole, would take the better part of 2 years to fully resolve. These things always did. Dr. Ansel Rowe, Harlan's former attending physician, surrendered his medical license in advance of the disciplinary proceedings that would have suspended it regardless. He had not been charged criminally. The payments he received had been structured carefully enough to create plausible separation from their actual purpose, but he was done practicing medicine, which was something. Sentinel Crown's architecture was subjected to a full independent security audit, the first in 7 years. The audit identified 3 vulnerabilities that had developed since Cole's original installation, none of them related to the access points Harlan had described in his recording, all of them the ordinary product of a system that had grown and changed without consistent architectural oversight. They were patched. The audit firm recommended establishing a permanent independent security review board to prevent similar accumulation in the future. The board of Vanguard Meridian Group voted to implement that recommendation before the audit report was even formally published. On a Thursday morning in early February, nearly 3 months after the day, Cole had walked through the revolving door with a sealed envelope and a bad knee. His phone rang. He was in Emma's school parking lot, having just dropped her off for the day. She had a science presentation that morning that she had prepared for extensively and was nervous about, in the way she was nervous about things she cared about, not outwardly, not complaining, but with the particular tight focus of a child who had already gone over her material several times and was running it again internally in the car. He had told her she would do fine. She had said she knew. He had believed her, and she had believed him, and they had parted at the school door with the matter-of-fact affection of two people whose relationship had settled into something solid enough that it did not require ceremony. Call was from Sloane Carrington. He answered it. "I have a proposal for you," she said. Without preamble, which he had come to understand in the weeks since, was simply how Sloane began conversations she had already decided the direction of. "Okay. I'm restructuring Vanguard's Global Security Division. The position that existed before is gone. I've redesigned it from the ground up because the old structure had too many single points of failure, which I think we both established pretty definitively in November." A pause. "I want you to head it." Cole watched a group of kids cross the parking lot in the cold February morning, backpacks bouncing, coats not quite warm enough the way kids' coats almost never were. "What does the position look like?" he asked. "You have full architectural authority over Sentinel Crown's security infrastructure. That includes veto power over any proposed access modifications, licensing changes, or operational adjustments that affect the platform's public interest protections. You report to me directly, no intermediary executive layer." Another pause. "I learned something in November about what happens when the people who actually understand a system are too far from the decisions that affect it." "One structure," Cole said. "What are the conditions?" "I have two." He waited. "Sentinel Crown operates in the public interest. That means the access point architecture remains transparent to the regulatory bodies that oversee the systems it protects. No proprietary restrictions on the security documentation that those bodies need to do their oversight work. If someone at Vanguard, me included, ever proposes a change that would reduce that transparency, you have the authority to block it and escalate to the independent review board." She paused. "That's the first condition. What's the second?" "That you tell me your actual availability constraints before you start, not after." Her voice had something in it that was not quite dry and not quite warm, somewhere in the specific territory that people occupied when they had been through something difficult with someone and had arrived at a kind of ease on the other side of it. "I know you have a daughter. I know pickup is at 3:15, and that matters more to you than any meeting I will ever schedule. I'd rather know that clearly than discover it sideways." Cole looked out the windshield at the empty parking lot, most of the school day's arrivals now complete, the cold morning quiet settling back in. "I have one condition of my own," he said. "Name it." "Position doesn't require me to be in the building every day. Some of this work I can do from anywhere, and some of it I can do better from anywhere, because I'm not inside the building's own assumptions. I need that flexibility formalized, not informal." "Done." No hesitation. "Anything else?" Cole thought about it for a moment. Genuinely thought about it, not as a negotiating posture, but as an honest assessment, the kind of assessment you made when you were being asked to step back into something that had cost you something the first time, and were trying. Clear-eyed about what it meant to do so again. "No," he said, "that's it." Good a pause. "Cole." "Yeah. My father said to tell you he still has the cheese. From the gas station near Janet's house. He said Emma mentioned it, and he had someone pick it up. A beat. I don't know what that means, but he was very specific about it." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell him thank you." He hung up and sat in the parking lot for another minute, and then he drove home. The cheese was delivered that afternoon by a Vanguard courier who handed it to Janet with the formal gravity of a man completing an official assignment, which Janet found baffling until Cole explained it, and which Emma found entirely reasonable. Because of course a person would send cheese via courier if they had said they would get cheese and hadn't gotten it. Just keeping your word. Trent Maddox's formal review concluded in late January. The investigation into his role established clearly that he had acted in good faith on deliberately falsified information, and that at every point where he had possessed accurate information from the moment the terminal showed the verification request for Harlan's destroyed device, he had acted correctly and at personal professional risk. The two counts that the early investigation had flagged against him, destruction of evidence and an unauthorized use of security authority, were declined for prosecution on the basis of good faith and subsequent cooperation. He was suspended for 60 days, which he served without argument or appeal. When he came back, Sloane had eliminated his old position and created a new one, Director of Security Ethics and Command Training. The title was new, but the need it addressed was not Vanguard had discovered, in the hardest possible way, that a security organization whose people were trained to follow the chain of command without the parallel training to question it when the chain was compromised was a security organization that could be used as a weapon against itself. Maddox took the position. He was not certain when he started that he was the right person for it. He said as much to Cole the first time they spoke properly after his suspension ended, over coffee in a place near Vanguard that was not inside Vanguard, because both of them had learned something that morning in November about the value of conversations that happened outside institutional walls. I followed orders. I shouldn't have followed, Maddox said. That's the entire story of my mistake, and now I'm supposed to teach people not to make the same mistake. He turned his coffee cup on the table, the slow rotation of someone working through a thought they hadn't finished yet. I'm not sure that's the right qualification. Cole looked at him. You know what it feels like to realize you were used, he said. You know what it felt like from the inside, what Warren's briefing sounded like, why it was convincing, what you told yourself to get past the parts that didn't quite fit. He paused. That's exactly the right qualification. The people you're training haven't made that mistake yet. You have. You can tell them what it actually feels like, not what they imagine it might feel like. That's different. Maddox was quiet for a moment. My father was a cop, he said. 30 years. He used to say that the best officers were the ones who'd made a mistake early and learned from it, rather than the ones who'd been lucky enough never to be tested. He paused. I used to think that was something people said to make mistakes sound less bad. And now I think he was right. A pause. I still think it would have been better not to make the mistake. Yes, Cole said. That's also true. They sat with both of those things for a moment, because they were both true simultaneously and there was no resolution to that. Just the adult acknowledgement that life frequently contained contradictions that did not resolve, and that you carried both of them and kept going. Harlan Carrington spent 3 weeks at the medical facility in Wisconsin after November, supervised by a physician he had selected himself, undergoing the genuine evaluation that the altered assessments had been designed to replace. The results were what the original Dr. Okafor assessment had shown: a 68-year-old man with mild age-related changes in processing speed, full command of memory and judgment, and a cardiovascular system that his new physician described as belonging to someone who had spent his life under high stress but had the genetic luck to absorb it better than most. He moved back to Chicago in December, to a house in Lincoln Park that he had owned for 30 years and had spent most of those years working too hard to be in very often. He began spending time in it. He learned, somewhat reluctantly, that he liked the neighborhood in winter, the specific quiet of bare-limbed trees and cold lake air, and the particular way the city felt in January, stripped of the softening effects of greenery, all structure and light. He retired from Vanguard's daily operations formally in February, though the word retirement did not quite fit a man who continued to attend quarterly board meetings, maintained an advisory relationship with Marissa and with Cole, and had opinion-specific, well-reasoned, frequently correct opinions about Sentinel Crown's long-term architectural direction that he communicated through channels that were now, at Sloane's explicit establishment, formal rather than the oblique and deniable channels he had used when he was operating around a security threat inside his own executive team. He and Sloane had dinner every Sunday, not always easily, not always without the weight of things that had been left too long in the wrong configuration between them. Consistently, which Cole thought was the more important thing than showing up even when it was uncomfortable, the willingness to stay in the room with the difficulty until it became, gradually, something more manageable than it had been. He knew about the Sunday dinners because Emma, who had eventually learned the broad outlines of what her father had done in November, in the way children learned things through overheard conversations, through the slight adjustments in how adults spoke around her, through her own attentive and accurate reading of the emotional temperature of situations, had asked Harlan about them when she met him for the first time in March. Harlan had come to the Vanguard offices for a board meeting, and Cole had Emma with him that day, because it was a teacher development day, and Janet was visiting her sister in Michigan. Emma had spent most of the morning in Cole's new office doing homework and reading, which she did with the self-contained ease of a child who had spent significant portions of her life in spaces that were primarily designed for adults. When Harlan arrived, Cole had introduced them. Harlan had looked at Emma With the particular attention he gave things that interested him, focused, genuine, without the performative warmth that adults often produced around children they did not know what to do with. Emma had looked back at him with the same directness. "You're the one who called my dad," Emma said. Harlan looked at Cole briefly, then back at Emma. "I am. He didn't come home until late. I know. I'm sorry about that." Emma considered this. "Did it work out?" "Yes," Harlan said. "It worked out." Emma nodded once, with the decisive finality of a 9-year-old who had received a satisfactory answer and was ready to move on. "Okay," she said, and went back to her book. Harlan looked at Cole with an expression that contained several things at once, none of which needed to be named. Cole said nothing. Harlan said, "She's like you. She's better than me," Cole said. "At most things. That's how it's supposed to go." They left it at that. The lobby of Vanguard Meridian Group was repaired in early December, the scuff mark on the marble near the reception desk buffed out, the emergency lighting system upgraded, the surveillance configuration reset to real-time, and locked at that setting through a hardware modification that required physical presence to alter. Cole had specified that modification himself, because the 14-second buffer delay that had been Warren's operational tool had also, in a way, been the first thing that told Cole the morning was not what it appeared to be, and he preferred systems that told the truth about what time it was. On a Tuesday in March, almost 4 months after the morning that had started in this same lobby, Cole came in through the revolving door at 8:30. He was not wearing the weathered coat. He had a different coat, still not expensive, still practical, because he was constitutionally uninterested in clothing as signifier. He had his bag. His knee ached slightly because Chicago in March was still cold enough to remind it that it had been broken once. He was crossing the lobby toward the elevator bank when he heard his name. He turned. Trent Mattox was standing near the reception desk with 2 people Cole did not recognize young, both of them, early 20s probably, with the particular alert posture of people who were new to something and were paying close attention to everything in an attempt to not miss what mattered. New hires, Cole registered. Probably security training candidates. Maddox said something to the 2 young people and then walked toward Cole, carrying something. A box, small, wrapped, simply not gift-wrapped in any elaborate sense, just a box. He held it out. Cole looked at it. "Open it," Maddox said. Cole opened it. Inside was a phone, encrypted, ruggedized, the same model as the one that had been destroyed in this lobby 4 months ago. Not a cheap gesture, that model was not inexpensive, and Cole could tell from the lack of anything surrounding it. No receipt, no card, no explanation beyond the object itself. That Maddox had purchased it without making a thing of purchasing it, which was its own kind of statement. Cole turned it over in his hand. It was heavier than his current phone. Solidly built. He looked at Maddox. Maddox said, "I bought it myself. Not through Vanguard, not expense, not anything official. He stopped. I broke the last one. I thought I should replace it." Cole looked at the phone for a moment, thought about saying several things, and decided not to say most of them, because Maddox had arrived at this gesture on his own and had not needed commentary to get there, which meant commentary would mostly just dilute it. "What did you learn?" Cole asked. He kept his voice level. Not testing exactly. More the question you asked when you wanted to know the real answer rather than the organized one. Maddox was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, but in the way of someone who wanted to say it right. "That following orders isn't the same thing as protecting people," he said. "That I can do one without doing the other, and that when those 2 things are pointing in different directions, I need to be able to tell which one is actually my job." He paused. "And that the person who hands you the orders isn't always the person who will have to live with what following them does to someone else." Cole looked at him. He accepted the phone. He did not say that it was a good answer, because it was, and Maddox knew it was, and saying so would have made it smaller. Put it in his coat pocket. At that moment, the elevator opened and Sloane stepped out, moving at the pace she always moved, which had not slowed in 4 months, but had changed in a quality. Cole had noticed gradually less like someone proving something to a room, and more like someone who knew where they were going and was going there. She was carrying a tablet and a coffee cup and her phone simultaneously, which was the ordinary coordination of a CEO on a Tuesday morning, and she looked like exactly what she was. A 30-year-old woman running a corporation that she had decided to run on her own terms rather than the terms she'd inherited. She stopped when she saw Cole and Maddox. She looked at the box, at the phone in Cole's hand, at Maddox. "Is that what I think it is?" she said. "It's a phone," Maddox said. "A replacement phone." "Yes." Sloane looked at Maddox for a moment with the expression of a person who had arrived at a genuine opinion of someone's over time through actual observation rather than first impression, which was the only kind of opinion that held up. Then she looked at Cole. "You're going to be late for the 9 o'clock, she said. "I know what time it is," Cole said. "The independent review board members are already upstairs."
"I know."
She looked at him for a moment with something that was not quite a smile and not quite not a smile, the expression of someone who had been through enough with a person to have moved past the stage where every interaction required framing. Then she turned toward the elevator. "Trent," she said over her shoulder, "your 2 trainees are standing by the reception desk, looking like they're not sure if they're supposed to be watching this." Maddox glanced back. The 2 young people had indeed been watching, with the focused attention of people who understood they were seeing something that would likely make sense to them later, even if not entirely yet. Maddox said, "Give me a minute," and the 2 trainees nodded and turned back to their observation of the lobby's layout with the careful studiousness of people who had been told to pay attention to everything. "You coming?" Sloane said to Cole. Cole looked around the lobby for a moment. The marble floor, the security desk, the camera array above the elevator bank, running in real time now, showing exactly what was happening at exactly the moment it was happening. The revolving door through which Chicago winter arrived in cold drafts every time someone entered or left. The whole ordinary machinery of a building that had been the site of something extraordinary and had, as buildings did, simply continued being a building. He thought about what the lobby had looked like at 8:15 on that November morning through eyes that had already clocked the camera delay and noted the guard positioning and registered, in the way that old habit registered things, every element of the environment that might matter later. He thought about how nobody had looked at him twice. He thought about Emma, who was at school right now doing whatever 9-year-olds did on Tuesday mornings, who had that morning eaten toast with the good cheese that Harlan had sent via courier and had not commented on the fact that it had taken 4 months for that to happen, because Emma had learned, somewhere in the accumulated experience of being his daughter, that her father kept his promises eventually, and that eventually was enough. He thought about his knee, which was going to hurt going up to the 41st floor if he took the stairs, and about the fact that the elevator was right there, and about how many things in life were not complicated if you just used what was in front of you, instead of looking for a harder way. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. Cole and Sloane stepped in. Maddox held the door for a moment, the same gesture he might have made for anyone in any building, small and automatic and ordinary. "Barrett," he said. Cole looked back. Maddox said, "For what it's worth, I'd let you through the front door now." Cole looked at him for a moment. "You let me through the first time," Cole said. "You just didn't know it yet." The doors closed. The elevator rose. There is a particular kind of person that most rooms fail to see. Not because the rooms are staffed by unintelligent people, not because the failure is anyone's fault in a simple way, but because most rooms are organized around the things that signal importance: the clothes, the title, the volume of the entrance, confidence that reads as authority because authority has taught us to recognize confidence as its proof, and the person who does not offer those signals, who arrives quietly and asks to speak with someone and carries a sealed envelope and has a bad knee and forgot to shave that morning, because his daughter had a nightmare that person disappears into the background of. The room's assumptions before they've said a word. Cole Barrett had disappeared into those assumptions his entire adult life. In the Navy, he had been the quiet one in rooms full of men who equated noise with strength, and he had learned things in that quiet that the noise had obscured for everyone else. In the years he spent building Sentinel Crown, he had been the technical person in rooms full of executives who understood money and market position and were not particularly interested in the details of the architecture that their business depended on, and he had understood things about that architecture that they never would. In single fatherhood, He had been the father eating cereal for breakfast and driving a car with 140,000 miles on it and calling his neighbor's emergency contact list a social life. And he had understood things about what mattered that he had not understood when he was younger, and had confused the weight of a situation with its importance. He had not come to Vanguard Meridian Group that November morning looking to prove anything. He had come because an old man who had built something worth building had asked for help, and because the thing that old man had built protected people who would never know it protected them, and because Cole Barrett had spent enough of his life in service of things that mattered to recognize one more clearly. He had come because his daughter was going to live in a world shaped by decisions made that day, and he wanted to be one of the people who made them correctly. He had come because Harlan called, and Cole answered. That was the whole story. But it was the kind of whole story that contained everything, all the ordinary weight of a life lived carefully, all the cost of the years that went into the morning, all the specific accumulated knowledge of a man who had been broken in the right places and had healed in ways that made him more useful, not less. Sloane Carrington had stopped trying to prove she deserved her father's company. She had started building something of her own, in her own image, on her own terms, and the difference between those two projects was the difference between spending your life looking over your shoulder and spending it looking at what was actually in front of you. It was not a comfortable transition. It had not happened cleanly or all at once. It was happening incrementally, Tuesday by Tuesday, Sunday dinner by Sunday dinner, decision by decision, in the ordinary accumulation of a person becoming who they were going to be. Trent Maddox had learned the hardest possible lesson about the difference between institutional loyalty and actual integrity, and had arrived on the other side of it with something that most people could not buy at any price: the specific knowledge of his own failure, the exact shape of it, and the hard-won understanding of how it had happened. He would spend the rest of his career passing that knowledge to people who had not yet had to learn it on their own terms, and some of them would be better for it. Harlan Carrington was having dinner with his daughter every Sunday in a house in Lincoln Park that he had owned for 30 years and was finally living in and learning at 68 that the things he had built that mattered most were not the things he could put a dollar figure on. And Cole Barrett was going to a meeting on the 41st floor of a building he had helped build, carrying a replacement phone in his coat pocket, with a knee that ached in the cold, and a daughter who was going to ask him tonight whether the Tuesday meeting had gone okay, and to whom he would say yes and mean it. The shattered phone was in a filing cabinet in Marissa Keene's office, in a sealed evidence bag, part of the documentation record of the investigation. It was not going to be repaired. It did not need to be. It had done what it was designed to do, not in the way anyone intended on the morning it was destroyed, but in the way that the things built with care sometimes worked, by being exactly what they were at exactly the right moment, even when the moment arrived through accident and violence and a sequence of events that nobody had fully planned. Everything that mattered had survived, not easily, not without cost, not without the specific damage that gets done to people and things when the people who are supposed to protect something decide instead to take it apart for their own purposes, but survived. There is a version of this story where Cole Barrett is recognized from the moment he walks in, where the security director verifies his credentials immediately, escorts him to the CEO's office, and the whole morning is a series of efficient professional interactions that resolve the problem by 11 o'clock, with no broken phones and no emergency lighting, and no one driving 4 hours round trip to Wisconsin's in the November rain. That version is a better morning, but a worse lesson. The version that actually happened, the version where nobody looked at him twice, where the phone was smashed, where everything had to be fought for through maintenance corridors and server rooms, and 41 flights of consequence, that version said something true about the way the world actually worked, and about the specific kind of strength that was invisible to rooms that measured strength by how loudly it announced itself. Never judge the strength of a man by how quietly he enters the room. Sometimes the person no one looks at twice is the only one who could have changed everything. And sometimes the most important thing he's protecting is something he won't mention until you've already seen it in everything he does. Cole Barrett pressed the button for the 41st floor. He was going to be on time. He had a daughter to pick up at 3:15.